My favorite one would be Rain and Blood because it was the first one we'd be talking about Mustaine. Mustaine is a very interesting person.
When Dave Mustaine showed up drunk to a studio meeting, smashed a custom guitar, and destroyed a $1 million deal in minutes, Tom Araya watched it all happen. That single moment changed everything. But why did that incident make so many musicians refuse to work with Mustaine ever again? What did Tom Araya see that made him keep his distance for decades? Let's uncover the truth behind it. The birth of two metal legends. In the early 1980s, two very different paths were forming in the world of heavy metal. Both would shape the genre forever, but in completely different ways. Tom Araya was building something solid with Slayer, while Dave Mustaine was turning his anger into musical fuel after being kicked out of Metallica. Slayer started in 1981 in Huntington Park, California. The band wasn't just another group of teenagers making noise in a garage. They had a clear vision of what they wanted to create. Tom Araya became the backbone of this vision. As the bassist and vocalist, he brought a steady presence to their chaotic sound. His bass lines cut through the mix with precision, while his vocals delivered their dark messages with power and control. What made Araya different from other metal frontmen was his stability. While many musicians in the scene lived wild lifestyles, Araya worked as a respiratory therapist during the day. He would spend his mornings helping patients breathe easier, then spend his evenings on stage creating some of the most intense music ever recorded. This balance gave him a unique perspective on both life and music. Slayer's sound was raw and aggressive, but it was also controlled. Songs like Angel of Death and Raining Blood were fast and brutal, but every note had purpose. Araya's leadership helped keep the band focused, even when their music pushed boundaries that made many people uncomfortable. He understood that being extreme didn't mean being sloppy. Around the same time, Dave Mustaine was dealing with a very different situation. In 1983, he was fired from Metallica due to his drinking problems and unpredictable behavior. The rejection hit him hard, but instead of giving up, he decided to prove everyone wrong. He formed Megadeth with the goal of being faster, heavier, and more technical than his former band. Mustaine was undeniably talented. His guitar skills were exceptional, and his songwriting showed real creativity. Songs like Peace Sells and Holy Wars proved that he could create complex, memorable music. Megadeth quickly gained a following among fans who appreciated technical skill and aggressive energy. However, Mustaine's personal struggles continued, even after forming his own band. His drinking and substance use were well known in the music community. More concerning to many was his unpredictable personality. He could be charming and professional one day, then hostile and difficult the next. This pattern made other musicians nervous about working with him. The contrast between Araya and Mustaine became clear early on. Araya built relationships based on trust and consistency. He showed up on time, did his job well, and treated others with respect. Mustaine, despite his talent, developed a reputation for being unreliable and sometimes destructive. Both men were part of what became known as the Big Four of thrash metal, along with Metallica and Anthrax. These bands helped define the sound and culture of extreme music in the 1980s. They toured together, shared stages, and influenced each other's music. The scene felt like a brotherhood, even though competition was fierce. But this brotherhood was about to be tested in ways no one expected. The studio incident that changed everything. The year 1986 should have been a celebration for thrash metal. Both Slayer and Megadeth were at their peak. Slayer had just released Rain in Blood, an album that shocked the music world with its speed and power. Megadeth had dropped Peace Sells, but Who's Buying, showcasing Mustaine's incredible technical skills and sharp songwriting. record labels saw an opportunity to create something historic. Combat Records and Def Jam Recordings, the labels behind both bands, started planning a joint project. They wanted to create a split EP and co-headlining tour featuring Slayer and Megadeth together. This wasn't just a creative idea, it was a business opportunity worth millions. Both bands had loyal fans, and combining them would create something massive. The plan seemed perfect on paper. Get both bands in a Los Angeles studio, work out the details, decide which songs would go on the EP, and shake hands on a deal that would benefit everyone. What could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. The meeting was scheduled for 1 p.m. at a professional recording studio. Slayer arrived on time. Tom Araya, Kerry King, Jeff Hanneman, and Dave Lombardo showed up ready to work. Label representatives and studio engineers were there too. Even David Ellefson, Megadeth's bassist, arrived promptly and apologized that Mustaine was running late, but would be there soon. 1 o'clock became 2 o'clock, then 3 o'clock. Studio time costs money, and every minute wasted was expensive. Nobody could reach Mustaine. His phone wasn't working, or he wasn't answering. The frustration in the room started building. Finally, around 4 p.m., 3 hours late, Dave Mustaine stumbled through the studio door. Everyone who was there later agreed on one thing: he was clearly drunk. Some said he smelled like whiskey. Others noticed his bloodshot eyes and unsteady movement. Whatever the exact details, it was obvious he wasn't in any condition for a professional meeting. Mustaine didn't apologize for being late. He didn't try to explain himself. Instead, he interrupted conversations and started criticizing Slayer's Rain in Blood album. He said producer Rick Rubin had made the album too polished and took away Slayer's raw energy. The irony was impossible to ignore. Here was a man who could barely stand up straight, criticizing one of metal's greatest albums. At first, Slayer tried to ignore him. They wanted to keep things professional, but Mustaine kept pushing. Kerry King, never one to back down from a fight, finally responded with a cutting comment about Mustaine's ability to play his own songs live without making mistakes. That hit Mustaine where it hurt most, his pride in his guitar playing. He snapped. What happened next became one of metal's most infamous moments. Mustaine spotted Kerry King's custom BC Rich Warlock guitar sitting on its stand. This wasn't just any guitar. It was a specially built instrument worth thousands of dollars that had become part of King's identity. Without warning, Mustaine grabbed the guitar, shouted something nobody could clearly remember later, and smashed it against a nearby amplifier. The guitar's neck cracked, the body splintered, pieces scattered across the studio floor. For a moment, the room went completely silent, except for the sound of broken wood hitting the ground. Then chaos erupted. Kerry King lunged at Mustaine, but his bandmates Dave Lombardo and Jeff Hanneman held him back. Tom Araya, usually the calm presence in any situation, stepped between them and tried to restore order. David Ellefson stood frozen, clearly horrified by what his bandmate had done. The label representatives quickly took control and escorted Mustaine out of the building. The studio meeting disaster cost more than just a broken guitar. The joint EP project was immediately canceled. The co-headlining tour was scrapped. Industry insiders later estimated that the failed collaboration cost between $2 and $3 million in potential revenue, a massive amount for the 1980s metal scene. But the financial losses were just the beginning. The incident damaged relationships throughout the metal community. Rick Rubin, the legendary producer behind Rain in Blood and many other classic albums, reportedly refused to work with Mustaine after hearing about the incident. Other producers and industry professionals started taking notice of Mustaine's reputation for unpredictable behavior. Concert promoters became more cautious about booking Megadeth. Some started requiring special deposits or extra guarantees before agreeing to put them on shows. The message was clear. Working with Mustaine meant taking risks that other bands didn't bring to the table. For Slayer, the incident confirmed what they had suspected about Mustaine's character. They respected his musical talent. Nobody could deny his skill as a guitarist and songwriter. But respect for someone's art doesn't mean you have to trust them as a person or want to work with them professionally. Tom Araya would later reflect on the incident in interviews, explaining that the broken guitar wasn't really the main issue. It was the disrespect Mustaine showed to everyone in the room, to Kerry King, to the band, to the people who had organized the meeting, and to the professional process itself. That kind of behavior couldn't be fixed with an apology. The incident created a divide in the thrash metal community that lasted for years. When the Clash of the Titans tour happened in the early 1990s, featuring Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth, the bands shared stages, but not much else. Backstage, Slayer and Megadeth kept their distance from each other. They maintained professional appearances for the fans, but everyone involved knew the tension was real. Even decades later, the 1986 studio confrontation remains one of the most talked about behind-the-scenes disasters in metal history. It showed how quickly professional relationships could be destroyed by one person's inability to control their behavior, regardless of their talent level. The incident left Tom Araya with a perspective on Dave Mustaine that would never change. Tom Araya's guarded truth. Tom Araya has been notably cautious when discussing Dave Mustaine in interviews, but his carefully chosen words reveal more than any angry outburst could. In the world of thrash metal, where big personalities and heated conflicts are common, Araya has always stood apart as someone who avoids drama and keeps his opinions measured. So, when someone like Tom Araya finally speaks about another major figure like Dave Mustaine, his words carry extra weight. In a backstage interview at a European festival in the mid-2000s, Araya made a comment that stuck with many people who heard it. When asked about his relationship with Mustaine and whether they might work together again, Araya smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. He said that Mustaine comes across as a nice guy, but he always keeps his guard up around him. That wasn't a dramatic statement or an angry attack. It was something much more telling, a quiet admission of distrust from someone who rarely shows his emotions in public. And it wasn't the only time Araya hinted at problems with Mustaine's behavior patterns. Over the years, Araya has pointed out how Mustaine seems to follow the same cycle repeatedly. He makes inflammatory statements in interviews, attacking former bandmates, rival bands, or collaborators. When the backlash comes, he issues vague apologies or claims he was misquoted. Then, the pattern repeats itself. In a conversation caught on camera in 2010, Araya described it as a cycle. Say something controversial, stir everything up, then claim you didn't mean it, and repeat the process. He wasn't laughing when he said it. There was no mockery in his voice, just the kind of fatigue that builds up over years of watching the same behavior happen again and again. The 1991 Clash of the Titans tour provided another example of the tension between Araya and Mustaine. On the surface, it was one of the biggest metal events of the decade. The North American leg featured Slayer, Megadeth, Anthrax, and Alice in Chains, playing to packed venues filled with thousands of devoted fans. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was far from harmonious. Multiple people involved in the tour have confirmed that tensions ran high from the very beginning. Mustaine, riding the success of Megadeth's Rust in Peace album, reportedly came into the tour with attitude problems. He had ongoing personal issues with members of Metallica and Anthrax, and his relationship with Slayer was already damaged by the 1986 studio incident. During that tour, Araya later recounted how interactions with Mustaine were consistently uncomfortable. At one show, Mustaine reportedly made a backstage comment about Slayer always sounding the same and suggested they were relying on image rather than musical growth. It wasn't a direct confrontation, but word got back to Araya and the rest of Slayer's crew. Rather than escalate the situation, Araya chose not to engage. He avoided Mustaine when they weren't performing and kept their interactions brief and polite. According to crew members, there were entire days when Araya and Mustaine didn't speak at all, despite sharing buses, stages, and backstage areas. Araya would later reflect that the energy felt different when Megadeth was on the bill. He described it as feeling like there was always a shadow hanging over everything, with everyone pretending not to notice the unresolved tension in the air. The professional price of unpredictability. Tom Araya's perspective on Dave Mustaine goes beyond personal discomfort. Over the years, he has observed how other musicians and industry professionals respond to Mustaine's reputation. In interviews, Araya has hinted at conversations with other bands that quietly turned down opportunities to tour or collaborate with Megadeth. Not because of the music, but because of the instability they associated with working with Mustaine. Araya has pointed out that people in the music industry notice and remember how others behave. They pay attention to how someone treats colleagues, how they handle pressure, and whether they show up prepared and professional. In an industry where reliability and professionalism matter as much as talent, Mustaine's reputation for volatility made him a risky choice for collaborations. This sentiment reflects something many industry insiders have said privately. Working with Mustaine can bring high rewards, but it also brings high risks. He contributes talent, technical skill, and name recognition to any project, but he also brings unpredictability that can derail plans, damage relationships, and cost money. For professionals like Araya, who value consistency and respect in their working relationships, that kind of volatility simply isn't worth the potential problems it creates. Interestingly, Araya has never denied Mustaine's musical abilities. In fact, he has praised them on several occasions, calling him one of the most driven guitarists he has ever seen. But his praise always comes with a qualification. In a 2018 interview, when asked directly if he respected Mustaine, Araya paused before answering. He said he respects Mustaine's work and his journey, but respect doesn't always mean trust. That distinction is important. It shows that Araya can separate an artist's work from their personal character, but that doesn't mean he wants to work with someone who makes the creative process more difficult than it needs to be. Kerry King has noted that Mustaine can't help but stick his foot in his mouth, reflecting a sentiment shared by many in the metal community. Even those who admire Mustaine's musical contributions often acknowledge the personal challenges that come with working alongside him. Even decades after their most intense professional interactions, Araya's position remains consistent. In private conversations, he has reportedly told friends and collaborators that he holds no personal anger toward Mustaine, but describes him as not someone he would go out of his way to see. That's a diplomatic way of saying the relationship, whatever it once was or could have been, is finished. Not because of anger, but because of a quiet, final decision to avoid unnecessary complications. Araya's approach reflects a broader understanding of how professional relationships work in the music industry. The story of Tom Araya and Dave Mustaine offers insight into how the music industry really works behind the scenes. While fans often focus on the music itself, the people who create that music have to work together as professionals. They need to rely on each other, trust each other, and maintain relationships that can last for decades. In thrash metal, where the community was relatively small and everyone knew everyone else, reputation mattered enormously. Word traveled fast about who was reliable and who wasn't. Bands, producers, promoters, and label executives all shared information about their experiences Working with different artists, Mustaine's technical abilities as a guitarist and songwriter were never in question. His contributions to both Metallica's early work and Megadeth's extensive catalog demonstrate genuine musical genius. Mustaine has sold over 50 million records worldwide and won a Grammy Award for Best Metal Performance in 2017, proving his commercial and artistic success. But success as an artist and success as a collaborator are two different things. The music industry is built on relationships, trust, and the ability to work together under pressure. When someone develops a reputation for unpredictable behavior, it affects their ability to build and maintain the professional relationships that make long-term success possible. Tom Araya's careful distance from Mustaine reflects a professional decision rather than a personal vendetta. In interviews, Araya has consistently avoided making dramatic statements or engaging in public feuds. His approach has been to quietly maintain his boundaries while focusing on his own work and relationships. This strategy has served Araya well throughout his career. Slayer built a reputation not just for their intense music, but for their professionalism and reliability. They became known as a band that promoters could count on, that other musicians enjoyed working with, and that always delivered what they promised. The contrast with Mustaine's reputation is striking. While Megadeth has achieved enormous success, stories about Mustaine's difficult behavior have followed the band throughout their career. Kerry King has noted that he and Dave Mustaine would have butted heads like no tomorrow if he'd stayed in Megadeth, suggesting that the problems weren't limited to Slayer. The incident at the 1986 studio meeting wasn't just about a broken guitar. It was about respect, professionalism, and the kind of behavior that the metal community was willing to accept from its members. By smashing Kerry King's guitar and disrupting the meeting, Mustaine sent a message about how he handled disagreements and pressure. That message was received and remembered by everyone who witnessed it or heard about it afterward. Tom Araya's revelations about Dave Mustaine show us a side of the music industry that fans rarely see. Behind the powerful music and stage performances, real people struggle with professional relationships, trust, and respect. Araya's decision to maintain distance from Mustaine was about protecting his own professional standards and working relationships. What do you think is more important in the music industry, raw talent or professional reliability? Let us know in the comments below.